April 2006. My life is pretty much exactly the same as far as I can remember, except that I read quite a few more books in April than I did in February and March. I think more than both of those months put together. So let's jump right into the books. And the first book that I read in April of 2006 is A Dirty Job by Christopher Moore. And this is the first in a duology, I suppose, of books about death. Our main character is Charlie Asher. He's a perfectly normal guy living a perfectly normal life with a perfectly normal wife who's pregnant. His wife dies in childbirth, and more people around Charlie start dying, and he finds out that he is the new avatar for the Grim Reaper, or Death. And he has to guide souls to their final destination, but there are other forces that are trying to take those souls for nefarious purposes. And so he's fighting these other forces. Light-hearted stuff, actually. I mean, it's Christopher Moore, and I like Death as a character. I was initially reminded of On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony, which is not a funny book, but it's essentially about a guy who kills Death and has to take over as Death. And it's part of his Incarnate series, I believe is what it's called. So that came to mind when I was reading this. But it's another fun, light Christopher Moore book, but a subject that I enjoy. A Dirty Job, Christopher Moore. All right, now we have a trilogy. So we're going to fly through this, I think. Human Resources by Pierce Askegren, or however you say his name. He's been on this list many times. I never know how to say his name. This is the first book in the Inconstant Moon trilogy. The main character is Eric Morrison, and it's spelled the proper way with a K. He's gone to work for this corporation on the moon. The moon's been colonized, and it's basically run by all these different corporations. And Eric Morrison is going to essentially get caught up in a bunch of corporate espionage. But there's also this female character whose name I don't recall, who is part of SETI, searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. And she has this sort of psychic ability that makes people want to please her. She's going to get involved in all of this. And Eric Morrison's, the guy that he replaced went to work for a rival corporation, which is you're not supposed to do. So all sorts of just corporate, not necessarily political, but can you separate the two? Shenanigans going on the moon. I followed that up with Fall Girl, the second book in the Inconstant Moon trilogy. And in this one, an alien artifact has been found. Might have been found probably around the end of the first one, maybe. So they're trying to build on the moon. They're trying to build a spaceship that will allow them to go and investigate this alien artifact. Meanwhile, still corporate shenanigans and all sorts of stuff going on. And in the third one, Exit Strategy, Pierce Askegren. Eric Morrison's two sons have been killed on Earth. He's unable to go back to Earth for a funeral or anything. So he's very upset by all this, but people are still coming after him, still corporate shenanigans going on. He's going to be able to deal with everything and his own personal grief. So, Human Resources, Fall Girl, Exit Strategy, Pierce Askegren, the Inconstant Moon trilogy, some good sci-fi, corporate kind of stuff with, I think, pretty good characters. There you go, a nice science fiction trilogy. After that, House of Blood by Brian Smith. This is a leisure book. This is the first Brian Smith I ever read. I believe it's his first novel. I want to read the back cover copy because I like the back cover copy on this. And it just starts like this. Later, the ones left alive would agree they never should have turned off that dark stretch of Tennessee interstate. They were tired and tense, 2 guys and 3 girls arguing over a vacation gone bad. But things were about to get worse for the 5 young friends. Much, much worse. In fact, most of them would never see the highway again. The woods were dark and forbidding, filled with unseen dangers and inhuman sounds. The light in the distance promised sanctuary from the grasping terrors. Instead, the light lured the travelers to the very heart of evil, a house at the entrance of hell, a house that held only torture, depravity, and, for the lucky ones, death. Big fan of this book. As I said, first thing I ever read by Brian Smith, and I have read many, many, many things since then. I mentioned this at some point. I know when I talked about it. I last week recorded a review for a Brian Smith book. Talked about how I have all of his leisure books. I have most of his other stuff. There are a few things, maybe half a dozen, that I don't have, including his newest one. Actually, his last couple new ones because I was unemployed. But fantastic stuff. Pretty violent and bloody, if I remember correctly. I believe there's a new edition out. I want to say from Grindhouse, but I don't know if that's accurate. So don't take my word for it. But I am more sure there's a new edition out than I am that it's from Grindhouse. That's all neither here nor there. House of Blood, Brian Smith. Great stuff. You're going to see his name a lot. Excuse me. After that, we have The Psychology of the Simpsons, edited by somebody. Alan Braun, PhD, and Chris Logan is what it looks like. Again, for those of you who watch all these videos, very light ink in the pen. Light black ink in the pen I was using, and so it's difficult to read. I would turn that light on. That would help me, but then it would destroy the video. Anyway, The Psychology of the Simpsons. This is just a bunch of essays by psychologists that does basically the same thing that the philosophy and pop culture series does. It takes The Simpsons and psychology and either one of two things. Uses psychology to analyze characters, and I suppose possibly situations, in The Simpsons, or uses The Simpsons to illustrate ideas and things in psychology. I really like this stuff, and when I was at Bowling Green, I double majored in philosophy and psychology, so love the pop culture and philosophy books, and psychology and pop culture books have been more hit and miss than the philosophy ones, but this one is really good, in my opinion. The Psychology of the Simpsons, edited by Alan Braun. That's what I'm going with. PhD and Chris Logan. After that, we have Industrial Magic by Kelly Armstrong. This is the 4th book in the Women of the Otherworld series. It is the 2nd book to star the witch, Paige Winterbourne. She was introduced as a secondary character in the 2nd book, graduated to lead character in the 3rd book. Now she's lead character in the 4th book in the series. And yes, she is a witch. There's the American Witches Coven, something, I can't remember what it's called, but a huge organization of witches, but they're very conservative, ultra conservative. Paige has broken away from them and is trying to start her own more progressive coven, but somebody is killing the teenage children of the leaders of these cabals throughout the country that are sort of like mafia families, but of a supernatural nature. And Paige happens to be dating the son of, he's the what did it say, the unwilling heir, rebel son and unwilling heir of one of these cabals. So she sort of got an inside track into trying to figure out what the hell's going on, stop these murders, and while also dealing with the ultra-conservative coven and starting her own coven. I really, really like these books. This is a series that I would like to purchase and eventually reread. I'm never going to have time to read everything. And so rereading doesn't make a lot of sense, but sometimes you got to do it. You want that comfort food. But Industrial Magic, Kelly Armstrong, really good stuff. Then we have X-Men Dark Mirror by Marjorie M. Liu, Liu. And in this story, Jean Grey wakes up with not knowing where she is, with no mutant powers, and realizes she's not in her own body. And with her are Cyclops, Wolverine, Rogue, and Nightcrawler, who are also powerless in the wrong bodies. They have to figure out what the hell's going on. It's an X-Men book. X-Men aren't my favorite, but I enjoy reading comic book novels. And I mean, this does have. I'm a big fan of Nightcrawler. I like Rogue. Rogue. I like Cyclops well enough when he's well written. Wolverine and Jean Grey are fine. So, a decent comic book novel. X-Men, Dark Mirrors, Marjorie M. Liu. Excuse me. The penultimate book that I read in April of 2006 is Liquor by Poppy Z. Bright. This is the second book in a series, the Ricky and G-Man series. Ricky and G-Man, lifelong friends, lovers, I guess, and they have decided to open a restaurant. They were line cooks. Now they want to open their own restaurant, and it's going to be a place where every single dish has alcohol in it. So this is just about them living their life, trying to open this restaurant, dealing with all the things one deals with, as well as they've got a silent partner who they're trying to keep under control. It's Poppy Z. Bright. I found it really interesting. I knew this was part of a series, but I was confused because when I was looking this up, because it says everything said that this was book number 2. So, okay, fine. Seems like the first book in a series because they're opening up this restaurant, which is called Liquor. So I looked at another book in the series, and it said that was book 3. There was another book in the series said it was book 4. I couldn't find book 1 anywhere, and the other 2 books also both mentioned after Ricky and G-Man opened Liquor. After Ricky and G-Man opened Liquor. I'm like, how is this not the first book in the series? Well, eventually I found a list. I even went on, I think it was the Penguin Random House website, and it only listed Liquor, but it said it was book 2, and then these other 2 that are book 3 and 4. Finally found book 1, which is which I've never read. I didn't know it existed. It's essentially the early life story of Ricky and G-Man, whose name I believe is actually Gary. But it's just about them meeting, becoming friends, becoming lovers, and living their life. So it's basically everything before Liquor. But I didn't know that book existed. That's all neither here nor there for this list. Liquor, Poppy Z. Bright. Great book. Nothing supernatural, nothing horror. Just a well-written, interesting story about a couple of interesting characters. And the final book that I read in April of 2006 is The Nympho of Rocky Flats by Mario Acevedo. Not sure about that pronunciation. This is the first book in the Felix Gomez series. Felix Gomez was a soldier, I think in Iraq, in the Middle East somewhere. At least went over there a soldier, came back a vampire. And he is essentially hired to find out why this government facility in Rocky Flats seems to be causing nymphomania. Or if not nymphomania, then specifically nymphomaniacs. Because I think there's a difference. If you create nymphomania, all the women around are going to suffer from it. If you're creating nymphomaniacs, you're creating a woman who is a nymphomaniac. Does that make sense? Anyway, so this is in the vein of like a Christopher Moore or some of Victor Gischler's stuff, and I think there's at least 5 books in the series. I think I'm going to go back on Amazon, read the sample that they have to see, because I don't remember the writing or anything, the writing style. See if it interests me, and maybe go back and get the rest of these books and read them. But the Nymphos of Rocky Flats, Mario Acevedo. If you like Christopher Moore, maybe check it out. Or some of Victor Gischler's lighter stuff, check it out. If you're just looking for some vampire stuff that's not like supernatural horror vampire stuff, check it out. And that's everything that I read in April of 2006. And I did not, as usual, think of a question. But here's one for you. Something that I may have asked before, or at least has come up before. That is, if you are a fan of an author, will you read anything that they write? Or does it have to be the thing that you like that they write? Does that make sense? Basically, Poppy Z. Bright, horror writer. I think that's what people would know them as. So, but then they write, excuse me, or maybe he, because it's Billy Martin. I'm not sure what pronouns Poppy Z. Bright likes, and I apologize for that. But Liquor, again, not a horror story, more just a life kind of thing. There's going to be conflict and such, but if you're a big fan of the horror, are you going to read something like this? I've spoken to people who said they loved an author, but then they wrote a Western and they were never going to read it because they weren't a fan of Westerns, because they tried one once and didn't like it. And I was like, but you say this is your favorite author and you've read everything they've ever written, but now they've written a Western. Why would you not try it? So the question is, would you or would you not? If Stephen King wrote a straight up Harlequin romance type of thing, would you read it? Or would you be like, I can pass on that Stephen King book? If I just went with the biggest author out there. Well, you get the idea. For me, I probably shouldn't have brought up Harlequin romance, because that's like the one thing that would be the most difficult for me to pick up and read. But if it is an author I love, I will read it, or at least pick it up. I have so many unread books. I might pick it up with the intention of reading it eventually and never get around to it. But then I also read pretty much every genre, except for romance. So if my favorite horror author writes a Western, why wouldn't I pick it up and read it? I read Westerns. If my favorite fantasy author writes, a legal thriller, of course I'm going to pick it up and read it. I enjoy a good legal thriller. And if the writer is that high up on my list of favorites, I'm going to assume that they're going to do a good job in whatever this new genre is that they're writing in. Anyway, that's me. I'm trying to think of any examples where anything that I wouldn't pick up. Like if I thought of a terrible example, because I was going to say, if one of my favorite authors wrote some like pro-racist book, that I wouldn't pick it up and read it. But if they wrote a pro-racist book, I would get rid of everything they wrote and no longer support them. Not saying a book with racists in it. with racist characters or whatever, because characters do not reflect the author. But I mean, if it was literally pro-racist or whatever, that kind of thing. Yeah, that I would not pick up and buy. But it's not a good example because I would no longer support that author. It would change everything I thought about them. Um, silly example. But what about you? If your favorite author went outside the boundaries of the normal genres and things that you enjoy, are you going to give it a try, or are you going to stick with what you know and love? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you care to follow me on other social media, I'll have links for my Instagram and Bluesky in the description below. And that's all I've got for this week. I've lost my train of thought. My TV is actually on. I always mute it. And I just happened to glance up to someone's face being ripped open by an undead Native American, and I got a little flustered. So yes, that's all I have for this week. So until next week, read more books.